5 of Research and Information Skills. This week what I want to focus on is several things. First of all, primarily we're going to be looking at searching for information on the internet and how you can do that successfully using a range of shortcuts. But what I briefly want to direct your attention to before I begin that is that the first assessment is obviously due in week 6. It's now week 5. You should already have your articles and you should be at least having examined them, started to work out a strategy about how you're going to respond to them. The assignment is due on the 19th of August. As I've previously stated elsewhere and made the correction in the news for the unit on Milo, it's actually the Monday, not the Friday as I indicated. It's still in week 6 obviously, but certainly go by the date rather than the day. It'll due in at 4 p.m. What I'd recommend is have a look at all the materials online, particularly the 2 articles that indicate what differences there are between academic and non-academic sources. As I've said, I think if I were you, I'd be searching out your articles, the ones you need to attend to for the assessment. If you do have any questions once you've read through the articles, and you obviously read through the materials that pertain to it, then obviously contact Julie if you're a distance student, or email or contact one of the tutors, or even me directly if you wish, for some guidance if you need it. Okay, now I've cleared the admin out of the way, so to speak. I would like to move back to PowerPoint, so if you could open that, that would be great. For me, looking at search terms, etc., is about practice rather than theory, and I'm going to not speak hugely on this subject because I think a lot of it is self-evident, and most of it's indicated throughout the PowerPoint, but there will be some points I'd like to touch on just briefly. I guess for me, if we have a look at slide 3, the most important aspect about a search on the internet is actually finding and using the right search terms. So you can either refine a search or expand a search at whim, so to your desire's content. Often, if we're looking for a particular search term, particularly a popular one, we may get so many results that we're almost saturated, and in some sense it causes a certain amount of almost paralysis in terms of how we're actually going to wade through all the different information to find the material we use. This particular lecture and the material on the PowerPoint itself, and certainly some of the videos I'm going to indicate, are worth, at least from my perspective, are worth a look. They will make your searching much more efficient. Certain terminologies used for these particular things, I'm not going to necessarily discuss them here. Have a look on slide 4. Far more important is the actual phrases you use to actually attempt throw a net over the information that you need, which is not easy, and that is all determined by the terms that you put in, and essentially you need to be able to instruct the system to search for a phrase, which means that obviously you work out before you start what words are the most important ones, how they're put together so they actually make sense, and that obviously the system itself, in this case the net, the web, can actually help you find the material that you want. If you have a look on slide 7, I outline the fact that sometimes singular or even or plural, etc., words in this sense, they actually make a huge difference to what results you get back, and in this case it can be rather annoying if you get too many results back, or can be in some cases quite enlightening, and the differences are profound. Obviously the inclusion of a single letter, or even a tense for that matter, can change what results you get back quite profoundly. So it's actually worth looking at and considering how you term them, how you term a phrase, Another thing worth considering is the alternative spelling of certain words. The American spelling of certain words will obviously give you a wider stretch of results than if, say, for instance, you use British or Australian spelling. Another key point here is the use of synonyms, and from my perspective they are significant in the sense that if you've got a fairly good understanding of what synonyms are, essentially you then have a whole armory of different words that you can use to describe the same thing. And I've used the example, for instance, about the internet or the World Wide Web, WWW, or just the web itself as words. All of those will return certain results, obviously in a certain order. So if you are thinking of searching for a particular item, think about the alternative spellings of that particular thing. What possible alternative words, phrases you could use to describe that particular item, which may return better results. And also just simply think about how you construct the phraseology in your search terms. All have a profound effect on the results that you get back. On slide 9, I indicate all the possible synonyms or alternative words that could be used for the word student. And there's many, as you can see. And even though some are less common and would be fairly specific in terms of putting it into a search engine, they give you at least an indication of possible alternatives to a word like student. Now, if you're using online databases, the key thing with a database is that they often hold vast amounts of information in particular fields or areas. A library catalogue, as the one in UTAS that we have, is a good example. The cool thing about databases, particularly library databases, for instance, is that there is often a catalogue that goes with it that can actually trace a particular number to a book, and then obviously that book can be retrieved for you at some point, or you can retrieve it yourself out of a database if it's available digitally. There are other things like periodical indexes, which often include full indexes, abstracts, and sometimes full text, all of which are valuable in terms of literally reviewing information at a glimpse. In this case, particularly abstracts are crucial. They're your first port of call in terms of working out whether you actually want to retrieve an article or even pay for it if you have to. Often you do. And although luckily in UTAS we have subscription to many articles. In its most basic form, an index in a database will provide, as is indicated on slide 12, a whole raft of information that will help you determine whether, as I said before, whether you actually want or need that particular bit of information. An example of an abstract is on slide 13, and I mean, as you'll see, it's a condensed version of the whole article being presented, and it's a great and quick way of ascertaining whether you actually want to retrieve a particular article. I put quite a few slides about databases and about searching them. I guess primarily on 15 I indicate why field searching is important, particularly in large databases and especially in full text databases. Field searching is literally a way of refining your search, so you can take it down almost by increment and reduce the volume of returns that you get. On 16, I've kind of indicated the databases that I use at work, for instance, and how if I needed to go searching for a student, for instance, I can simply search. I could search by surname, by Christian name, if I need to, even by age or the suburb where someone lives, even obviously by courses. Now, each one of those will have very different results as a return. Some are unusable. I'd argue that perhaps course or even suburb would be fairly useless, and age. Names, to some degree, certainly the Christian names, fairly limited, but obviously surname. And that's one of the main databases I use at work. I've included several videos during the presentation. I was tempted to literally just put the links into Milo. I've yet to kind of decide that. Certainly for the most part, they're short, easy to watch, and have some fairly good suggestions. And certainly beats me prattling on here about ways that you can find searches, particularly when someone's done it better than I can, in a comfy YouTube form. I won't say a lot more about databases because, as I say, I think for the most part you should be looking at these things yourself. I think the videos indicate certainly quite good ways of doing this, certainly through Boolean mechanisms, or Boolean process, I guess might be a better word. What I want to move on very briefly is looking at the evaluation of internet sources. And for me, and this is the mantra of the actual semester, is that finding good quality information online is difficult at the best of times, but if you actually use the library service, and certainly with UTAS it's called Summon, to find information relating to a particular subject, you're almost guaranteed to find material that you can use in your assessments. I'd argue that public libraries have similar facilities, but they're not geared toward the academic enterprise as we are. And so again, I kind of direct you or even push you towards the UTAS library system when you're trying to access material for assignments. In its rawest form and its most basic form, what you've got to look at if you're trying to evaluate an internet source is look at perhaps 4 components. All have obviously different measures, I guess, again for want of a better word. So you'd be looking at who the author is of a particular piece, what the date is, because currency is an issue, and as we discovered last week, currency is part of our evaluative tools for looking at information and whether we can use it or not. Also the content, and the other thing I draw your attention to is whether something is sponsored. I have some issues with sponsors. I try not to labour the point too much, but generally if someone has sponsored a certain work, then perhaps it's skewed to some degree towards obviously their best interests. On slide 24, we look at obviously some of the issues with author or authorship on the web. Sometimes it's difficult to find who wrote an article. They may be writing under a pseudonym, they might simply be writing under an alias, or the person might be fictitious. The key thing is, if you can't find the author or the organisation that author is meant to be attached to, then I would doubt whether you can use the material. In fact, I'd argue that it's probably not suitable for academic research and use in your assessments. It's usually fairly easy, I've indicated this on slide 25, to work out what the date is. You can often see where pages have been updated over time. You can obviously look at, say, if there's a research paper or a project that's online or has an online presence. You can look at when the project started, or email the person who started the project to get clarity around the dates. Obviously a page that hasn't been maintained for long stretches of time, if at all, its reliability would be called into question. Why has it not been updated, etc. And for me, like I said, it's a fairly good excuse me, a fairly good indication of whether you can actually use a particular piece of information or research. Perhaps one of the most important things you've got to look at when examining a web page, website, is content. I've indicated several things on slide 26, and the first is that you have to check how statistics and facts were collected and to whom they are attributed to. They should all be referenced. Methodology should be spelt out, and should be transparent in that sense. You should be able to understand it and can follow it, and it makes sense, it's logical, that it's within a discipline, for instance. In that sense, it has cogency. The second thing is that you've noticed if there is any quotations or any other statements referred to in a particular piece of writing, that they're all referenced. So they not only have in-text referencing and citations, etc., but they also are reflected in the referencing section at the back, the bibliography, etc. Another indication of whether a piece, in this case a source or a resource, may be useful or not, is whether you can deem it to be popular or scholarly. If they're using certain types of language, like informal language, etc., it's probably not academic. And again, depending on what you're doing, you probably won't be able to use it in your assessments. The last thing I'll draw your attention to is whether a page is sponsored in some form or other. If it's fairly clear who the sponsor is, and whether that sponsor may have some editorial power or pressure that they can apply to the people writing the articles, it might indicate, like I said, that the articles are not entirely objective. Again, this is something you'd have to ascertain as you examine the actual page. Trying to find out or work out who a sponsor is important for many reasons. Primarily, as I've already indicated, to find out whether they would be able to exert, the company who sponsors the web page or website can exert any sort of editorial pressure. This is an important point, at least to me, to repeat, because it's the things that we often look when we're actually looking for information. We look at, obviously, the text, for instance, or perhaps the images or the videos that are on a site, but we don't actually look behind the actual page to see who may be paying, who may be supporting that page and keeping it up, so to speak. Anyway, I won't say a lot more about that. What I'd like to draw your attention to is the last two slides, slides 30 and 31. This is a paired exercise that attending students were doing. What I'm interested in is that you go through a process of actually looking at a particular word or a topic and see how, first of all, that can be transformed in terms of the use of synonyms or related words, and then actually go looking for and exploring how that works out or pans out when you actually start genuinely searching on the internet for these particular range of related words to a topic. Really, it's an experiment in search results and what you get back from what you put in. Moving away from the PowerPoint, fortunately, luckily, there's several resources that I've put in, certainly several exercises that might be worth a look. If nothing else, simply have a read through some of the material just so you get a better understanding or alternative understanding of the point of this particular week. I'll particularly draw your attention to the Harvard PowerPoint that I've put in. My recommendation is that you print out a guide to the Harvard method. You can get that off the UTAS website. That's a fairly current version. There's a lot of alternatives online to getting a guide to the Harvard method. Certainly worth a look. I do find, though, with referencing particularly, that it's a matter of practice, so as and when, so to speak. So when you need to use a particular piece of referencing style or etiquette, whatever you want to call it, that you actually usually learn on the job, so to speak. However, having a guide there that's handy, you can look up the conventions around a particular system of referencing, is well worth doing. The PowerPoint I provide only gives you a very basic guide, very basic indeed. The key focus for the tutorial this week, again, is worth a look. What I attempt to do is examine the nature of plagiarism in academic work, and also the notions of artistic theft, if it exists at all. And the other thing is looking at a discussion around the cut and paste culture of today, where essentially you can obtain any amount of information and cut and put it into a document that you have and claim some sort of authorship. And is there anything wrong with that? Some people suggest not. For instance, there's some argument in England that suggests that perhaps rather than students having to churn out original work, that perhaps they should be allowed to cut and paste from a whole range of different sources, put it into a logical order, and be marked on how they compile that information. So in other words, they're being they're being marked on their performance about creating a collage of information that makes sense. And as you can imagine, that's created quite some debate. I'm personally not a huge fan of it. I think people should attempt to make sense of information and put it in their own words, if for nothing else, through the practice and the application of knowledge, rather than actually taking other people's work in the place of their own. Perhaps the other minor point I would make is that with the amount of academic work that's going on in universities, and with the almost atomisation of information and knowledge, will there come a point where we can go no further, where we simply have taken our level of knowledge to the point where perhaps there's an end point, and that anything beyond that is simply repetition, but in slightly nuanced or novel forms. These are kind of interesting debates, and perhaps questions that academia will have to answer one day in whatever form. At the moment, the academic enterprise steams on, so to speak, into the future. Anyway, if you could try and examine the use of databases and actually have a go at using one. Simply get onto the library web system and have a look at how you can refine searches, etc. Something we'll be doing in class in some form or other. But also have a look at the exercises, and particularly, as I said at the start of this recording, begin to look at and even draft your first assessment, because time is getting on, time's going fast. Anyway, have a great week. All the best, Mike.